Hi there, welcome back to the Flask Mastery series. I'm Gorret Golden, and today we are diving into the world of database configuration for our Authors API. So we will be using Flask SQL Alchemy, Python MySQL, and the config class to optimize our application's database management. So fire up your code editor and let's get started. So since we are working with a local development environment, we are going to work with Xampp such that we set up a local server environment on our computer, as this is going to allow us to develop and test our Authors API without need of a remote server. So in case you do not have the Xampp software, you can go ahead and check out Apache Friends, which is the official site for downloading the Xampp software, and make sure that you're installing it according to your operating system. Because Xampp is actually cross-platform, meaning that it works on multiple operating systems. So we have Windows operating system, Linux, and etc. So by default, Xampp is installed with Apache, which acts as an HTTP server, and it is also installed with MySQL or MariaDB for the database management systems. And also by default, Xampp is built using PHP as its scripting language. So for us to get started working with Xampp, we are going to first of all start the server, which is Apache, and also start working with our relational database, for this case, which is MySQL. And I'll go ahead and access phpMyAdmin such that you have access to the dashboard. So this is phpMyAdmin, and it is the admin dashboard that we work with for the graphical user interface if we are to work with the database management in a way that we are creating databases and any other database operations that might be required. So before we jump into the code, let's first of all understand the importance of configuring our database properly. So the database is always the backbone of our application, storing critical information about our authors, the books, and then the companies. So by configuring it efficiently, we ensure smooth data management and unenhanced performance. So we are going to go ahead and create a new database. And for this case, we know that we are working with MySQL as the relational database, and it's built on top of SQL. So for us to be able to create the database, we are going to go ahead and work with the create command, Flask Authors DB as the name for the database. And having written the SQL command, I'll go ahead and click on the button for go, such that it runs the command successfully, as we are seeing this created. So what the command does, it goes ahead and it creates a new database, and this is the first approach you can work with, because you can also create a database by just using the graphical user interface where you click on new, then you can just enter the name of the database, for example DB, then you click on create, so it goes ahead and creates the database. So since we have already created our database that we are going to work with, I'm going to go ahead and drop the database DB that we have just created. So drop database, then I pass in the name DB, then I run the command such that this database is deleted. So for us to be able to work with the database, we shall need to configure a database connection, and since we are working with Flask SQL Alchemy, it works with the database connections in a way that it uses the configuration keys. And for this case, we need to set up an SQL database URI that should be used for the database connection. And this is the syntax that SQL Alchemy provides if we actually wanted to create a database connection for this case. So what happens is that we shall need to work with the dialogate and the driver, then we also supplement it with the username and then the password for our database, and then the name of the database. So the dialogate for this case is going to be our relational database, which is MySQL. So the driver for this case is going to be Python MySQL, which is a third-party library that will enable our authors API to communicate with our database. So you can check out the Python MySQL official site such that we first of all install this library. So I'll copy this and ensure that the virtual environment is activated first before the installation. So having it being installed, I'll now go ahead and paste the command that installs Python MySQL library. Then I'll press enter. Now for us to be able to set up the configuration keys, we are going to work with a config class that will allow us to centralize our application's configurations. So I'll define the class config, and then within this class I'm going to go ahead and store the SQL database URI key and then the value for the connection string. So within the connection string, we can see that we always have to pass in the username for the database and then the password that we are working with, and same applies to the database name that we have created. So the database name for this case is Flask Authors DB. If you haven't added any form of security to your phpMyAdmin, by default the username is root and the password is always now. So having created our configuration class with this configuration key, we are now going to go ahead and first of all register the class within our application factory function. So I'll go ahead and register it app.config from object, and for this case we are working with the config, and then I access the class. So this is all for our database configuration. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next session where we are going to work with the database migrations.